papal pronouncement. The Pope did so by issuing a papal bull in which he declared, without mentioning any names, that certain statement made by certain priests about indulgences were heretical. That's how Pope did. Certain statement by certain priests, amounted to heretical teaching. That means officially, actually, the question of indulgence is settled. Anybody who speaks against indulgences is a heresy. So now, if Luther say anything against indulgences, it will become heresy. Until this time, that was not settled. Indulgences were being sold and all that, but it was to speak against it won't become a heresy because indulgence is not part of the fundamental doctrine of the church. But now with this bull, what happened is indulgence is a fundamental doctrine almost of the church. Anybody who speaks against it. So why? That's very cunning. So Cajetan was very smart. Cajetan knew that Luther will speak, and then he can get. Pope now sent a special representative into Germany for the purpose of arresting Luther. By now, Pope Leo had realized that without the support of Frederick, Luther cannot be arrested. So Pope chose a man whom he thought would be most acceptable to Frederick. His name was Charles Militz. This man was a close friend of Frederick, and actually he was the private secretary of the emperor also. So he was a good friend of Frederick. So this man came before presenting his credentials to Frederick. Charles Militz sought an interview with Luther and Tetzel. He could not see Tetzel. Tetzel refused to meet him, but met Luther. Luther agreed not to speak about indulgences any longer. He also agreed to write a submissive letter to Pope. The Pope was well pleased with the letter, dated March 29, 1519. Pope said in that letter, sent a friendly reply, and in that reply he called Luther his dear son, and invited Luther to come to Rome. Again, the plot was, to get rid of him, But the only way he can get him is by pretending that everything is settled and he has forgiven everything, now you come. Remember the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, how Sanballat and Tobiah has sent letters and all. These plots, this is not time-old things they are doing. So, and actually Pope said, I will meet all the expenses of your trip to Rome. What more you want?
But why Luther agreed to not speak against the...
Yeah, because this man Militz came and he said that, now it is speaking against indulgence is a heresy. So if you speak, then the punishment given to heretics is burning on the stake. So he said, you are a young man, you have a bright future, you are a very intelligent man. Why die on the stake for an issue like this? You just keep quiet, Anyway, you said enough, and all those things. So he persuaded. Of course, his point was that, once he sent this letter, maybe, pretending to be very friendly and all, Luther could eventually be taken to Rome. Once he is away from Frederick and in Rome, they could do anything they want. It could be an accidental death, Luther just fell and slipped and broke his back and died on the fourth day. That's how many of the popes sometimes die. So that was a plan. So actually, Luther was kind of thinking to go or not to go. Yes, that was. During this time, another man called Eck, E-C-K, Eck, he was a professor. He was a professor and he wanted to debate with Luther on these issues. Actually, what happened is the Pope's attention was taken away, from Luther because the election coming, the election of who is the next emperor was getting very hot, and this issue of the Luther was nothing comparing to the issue of the next emperor, because that political issue, the wrong man comes, then Pope could be arrested, you know this history and all. So they wanted a right man to be the emperor, otherwise, that's more trouble. So for a while, Pope forgotten about all these things. So Emperor Maximilian died this time, January 1519. A new emperor had to be elected immediately. Pope had to work for a new emperor to be elected. Pope wanted Frederick to be elected, but Pope had to work hard to get him elected. Pope was too busy with the election. As a result, for 14 months, Pope could not deal with Martin Luther's case. Meanwhile, the two opposing sides in Germany did not keep silent. Eck wanted this debate and all that. So Luther's friend and associate professor in the University of Wittenberg, Karlstadt, wrote a thesis against Eck, who wrote a thesis against Luther's 95 thesis. Eck has written a counter thesis of Luther's 95. For that one, an answer was given by this Professor Karlstadt. And Eck wrote another thesis then in reply to Karlstadt, which he emphasized the office of Pope very strong. But Luther wrote a 12th thesis, against this one, and emphasized the fact that Pope's office has no real validity. Only in the previous 400 years the Pope established his office. Before that, for 1100 years, Pope's office had no validity in history or in the light of the scriptures. And then he also attacked all those false documents that, gave Pope. So an attack on the authority of the office of Pope had never been made before by anyone. The office. The emperors had all attacked the person of the Pope, but not the office of the Pope, The particular Pope they attacked. But now Luther is attacking the very office of the Pope. It caused a great sensation. Eck could not ignore it. He challenged Luther to debate on this question of the supremacy of the Pope. Luther always believed in the supremacy, actually Luther believed in the supremacy of the Pope. Actually Luther, his mother taught him that church is the Pope's house and Pope is the house father. You should always respect your father. That's how he was raised up. But for the past 9 months, he has studied about the church and the office of the Pope, and he has come to the conclusion that the office of the Pope has no validity in the light of the scriptures. So Luther felt no guilty conscience in attacking the Pope all the way he wanted, because he was occupying an office which didn't belong to him. To Luther, a surprise he found from his research that many so-called decretals were actually forgeries. Thus Luther saw another pillar of the Roman Catholic Church crumble down, the office of the Pope. All the others gone. Now on July 4th, 1519, Eck and Luther faced each other at Leipzig for a debate. As far as the learning and speaking ability was concerned, the debate was a tie. Nobody won. Both Eck was also, very able. But Eck outmaneuvered Luther. He made Luther to say that some of the teachings of John Huss were wrongly condemned by the Council of Constance. This is problem. The council, you can never question the decision of the council, because the council, 400, 500 bishops and Pope come together. After deliberation for sometimes 9 months and sometimes 4 years, 5 years, they come to a conclusion. So John Huss's writings were all examined by the Council of Constance, and they decreed that it was heresy. And Luther made a statement in the debate that the decision of the Pope and the Council, against John Huss was not correct. That means that now Luther stood on the side of John Huss, a heretic. Anybody who sided a heretic is considered a heretic in the Roman Catholic tradition, and he deserves the same punishment that John Huss got. So this was very cunningly, Yakas got Luther to say that. If someone declared the decision of the church to be wrong against a heretic, that person is also a heretic. When Luther said that, he did not think Huss was wrong in all points. A wave of excitement swept over the audience. You can just, as soon as he said that, you can just hear everybody, shh, Luther said that he's going to be then burned, He invited, his own judgment. He signed his own, execution, by his own hand and that. So Duke George of Saxony said so loud that everyone could hear it. God help us. That is the pestilence, the statement of Luther. He said, it's a pestilence. Luther's arguments had been historical. He called it to mind that the Eastern, he argued very well. He said that church does not mean the West only. The church means the East and the Western Europe. There was only a division made just few years back. And so the Eastern Europe does not accept Pope as the head. So how can you have only 50% of the church accepting Pope as the head and that he could be the head of the whole church? So he proved that therefore 50% of the church, never accepted Pope as the head of their church. Therefore Pope cannot be, the head of the church. You can best claim that he is only part of, not the whole of church. So, Luther has systematically attacked Pope supremacy. So the early councils knew nothing of Pope supremacy. He said he has proved that. Those councils knew. They never debated whether a Pope had supremacy or not. However, now no one could save Luther, for he has condemned himself by condemning the decision of the church that John Huss is a heretic. Sometimes even great men can say something right that could turn against. Yes. Remember when Jesus Christ stood before the high priest and the high priest asked the question, swearing by God, are you the Son of the Most High? And according to the Jewish law, when the high priest swear by the name of God and ask a question, the answer has to be given. Cannot maintain silence. So Christ had to speak. He can speak only the truth. So the question is, are you the Son of the Most High God? Jesus has to say yes. So immediately what did the high priest say? We don't need even witnesses now. Say that. So the answer of Christ was squeezed out of his mouth so that he could be condemned. The same thing Yek has done. He squeezed out of the mouth of Luther this answer that the ecclesiastical council of Constance was wrong. And to say a council is wrong, to say that Pope plus all the bishops, all the deliberations for years, in examining every writing, he is condemning by one statement. That means that decision was wrong then. Killing John Huss was a capital crime committed by the church and Pope. So they got it. Yes. One great result of this debate was that Luther's followers became more convinced of his stand and faith. That was the result. Every one of Luther's disciples understood that Pope is occupying, an unbiblical position, that he has no supremacy. Luther also won many new converts in that debate. One of such followers was Martin Bucer, who became probably one of the greatest leader of Reformation. Bucer had to shape the views of John Calvin. Actually, John Calvin is the product of Bucer, you will say that. So, this debate has won him, this man on his side, So, just like the martyrdom of Stephen, when Saul of Tarsus was there, if Stephen didn't win any soul, people say that Stephen's, preaching was not effective and all that, well, who said it? All the souls that Paul has won all over Europe, it's a Stephen's soul actually, the same way. If that debate proved it to be in any way wrong or detrimental to Luther, one great, success was there, the winning Bucer on the side of Luther, because he shaped the views of John Calvin. He, as was the case always, neither of the debater was able to change the view of the respondent. You know that never in the history a debate will change one of the parties. Both parties to the debaters become stronger. Whether it's Islam or Christianity, that's it. You become a better debater, the other party also better debater. So what's the use of debating? Actually, no use come out of debating if you wanted to have your ability of. And the people who come, some of them go more convinced about the wrong, some of them more convinced about the truth. So debates actually do not, sometimes I feel that, it's a waste, because a lot of innocent people who listen to the debate are confused. The victory of the debate usually is a play of words, Sometimes it's confusing. I remember when I was finishing my law school, we asked our Professor Shastri, he was one of our favorite professors. He had been a practicing lawyer for so long time before taking this teaching. So we asked him, said, Doctor, you have, Shastri, you have any word of advice to us? Many of us will be going to the legal practice. Any piece of advice that will help. And I still remember he saying that, I have a piece of advice. Now what is it? When the case is in favor of you, all the evidences are in favor of you, you maintain calm and cool and say things very quietly and all. Because the judge there sitting is not a fool. He can understand that, you are calm and quiet. That means you have the arguments and all. So one by one you just present. When the arguments are not in your favor, you can do one of the two things. You can raise your voice and say things that neither the judge understands, nor the other lawyer understands. You can just say things confusingly, and this is that and that is this, and if this is that, then therefore that is this and this is that, this sort of argument, and then so the judge is frequently arguing, what do you mean? Then, you try to explain it in more difficult way and use terms that are not relevant and all that. So finally, you may get a judgment in favor out of confusion. Or you can, humiliate your, opposition lawyer. Yes. That's what some of them did, Oh, they are arguing against in so favor, and you come and say, your mouth smells so bad. The lawyer can say anything in the court, Then that moment on, he won't open the mouth. Because he got a bad smelling mouth. So you put your questions, he would open your mouth. So he said, that's a piece of advice, So in all these debates, there are some pieces of advice you have to use sometimes. We say truth always win, yes, and ultimately, but not necessarily always in a debate truth will win. Truth, the debater's ability either to confuse people, and all that thing. Even if you have done your homework very well, sometimes in the debate, the wind could blow either way. That's the problem. So nobody won. Ek was very good and Luther was very good, but victory was not. But on this one point, Ek got Luther, In another sense, Ek basically got Luther now ready for, Inquisition. That happened. So this period between Leipzig debate in July 1519 and the Diet of Worms in April 1521 was a hectic period for Luther. Finally there was a diet in Worms, and the Pope asked the emperor, now the new emperor has come, Charles V, and Charles V commanded, gave orders to Frederick that Luther must be produced there. Emperor had to obey. Frederick has to. But Frederick said one thing, I will produce him upon one condition. I will take him from his residence and take him there after trial. Nobody should touch him. I will take him back to the place where he arrested. Then you do whatever you want. This much they call the agreement for safe conduct. This you have to promise. So emperor had to promise that, otherwise said, I will not. I will not. So the emperor agreed that, okay, safe conduct assured. You take him to the diet of worms. After the trial, you take him back to the place, his own castle, wherever he is, And then after that, so this safe conduct is for a period, certain days, certain weeks. Before that he must reach there. And there were some conditions also that he should not, after the trial, he should not speak to anybody in the public audience. He should quietly be taken there. So, with this undertaking, Frederick agreed to take Luther. And every day between this period, that is July 1519 and April 1521, was a hectic for Luther because, he knew that he had very little time. Very little time. He knew the outcome. He's going to be burnt. So he wanted to speak as many places as possible. So that he did. He was every day he was speaking to large crowds. Someone has sent him during this period a book by John Huss. He learned that John Huss said the same thing that Luther has said. Same thing. Exactly same thing. So he knew that definitely what happened to John Huss is going to happen to him also. Another book written by an Italian humanist, Lorenzo Valla, proved beyond doubt that the so-called document of donation of Constantine was a forgery, as we mentioned earlier. After reading these books, Luther was convinced that Pope is Antichrist, so he now started preaching that also. Yes, putting another nail, another spike on his. So, on June 15, 1520, Pope Leo ratified and signed the excommunication bull. The bull began with these words: "Arise, O Lord, plead thine own cause. Remember how the foolish man reproaches thee daily. The foxes are wasting the vineyard which thou hast given to Peter. The boar of the wood doeth waste it, and the wild beast of the field doth devour it." It's a quotation from Psalms and Song of Solomon's. That's how it began. The bull mentioned 41 theses of Luther and condemned 41 items of them as heretics, scandalous, false or offensive to pious ears, or seducing to simple minds, and standing in the way of the Catholic Church. The bull called upon people to burn all Luther's books. It forbade Luther to preach anymore. He and all his followers were asked to repent and recant publicly within 60 days. If they did not, they were to be treated as heretics. The bull ordered the government to seize and imprison Luther and everyone who followed Luther. The publication of this bull in Germany was entrusted to Eck. He soon found out that it was easier to prepare a bull than to publish it. He could get permission to publish it only in a few places. The elector Frederick said, "The bull cannot be published within my jurisdiction. Go publish somewhere else." At Erfurt, the students seized all the copies of the bull and threw it in the river. Luther came out with a tract against the execrable bull of the Antichrist. That was the title of it. So, we will go to the diet of worms in short time, but in between, 3 great Reformation treaties. All Germany listened to the words of Luther. His books circulated far and wide. People eagerly bought them and read them. Since there was no newspapers at that time, Luther printed pamphlets and tracts and distributed to people, Pope's enemies and people everywhere. Luther used the press as a means to mold public opinion. Luther was a great writer, great preacher. And truly all reformers were that, whether this would be or John Calvin, and all these men, great reformers, were all Even John Nelson Darby and many, many names, could be Simons and a great, great name in history. They were all good preachers and good writers. Without this, you cannot change, people. You have to convince people. Luther wanted to cushion the shock of the bull and prevent any panic of the people. For this, he wrote 3 books, also aimed at revolt against Rome. They were published in the second half of 1520. They are known as the 3 great Reformation treatises. The first one, to the Christian nobility of Germany, he talked about the abuses of Rome and encouraged to do away with them. He told all the princes, get rid of Rome. The second one, the Babylonian captivity of the church. We talked about it earlier. Luther exposed the falsity of the Christian church's claim that men could be saved only through the priest and the sacraments of the church. The third book, The Liberty of a Christian Man, is a small 30-page book, but it contains the whole sum and substance of Christian life. And what did Luther do with the bull? He got a copy of it. They delivered it duly. Writing and exposing the evils of Rome did not, satisfy Luther. Pope ordered to burn the writings of Luther. He decided to burn Pope's writings also. On December 10, 1520, a large number of professors, students and citizens were assembled in the city of Wittenberg. One of the professors kindled the fire. Luther placed the Book of Canon, the Roman Catholic Book of Canon, on the burning wood. And then amid solemn silence, Luther placed a copy of the bull on the fire and said, as thou hast wasted the Holy One of God, so may the eternal flames waste you, Pope. He waited until the bull and the canon law were completely burned to ashes. Then he returned to the town with his friends and colleagues. Luther was a fearless man too, If you are fearful, you cannot. But then who is not fearless? Who is not fearless? Everybody is afraid to die. The Pope was also afraid to die. But yet at the same time, in a sense, not afraid to die because, Luther understood that he is going to be burnt. Many young people remained back. They sang a song of praise to God and a funeral song to the bull. They had fun. Luther is summoned by the emperor. Pope was at the end of his rope. He exhausted all his ecclesiastical means to finish Luther, but he was not successful. So he turned to the last straw. He sought the help of the emperor. The Pope wanted to get elected Frederick to be elected next emperor, but as I said that he was not successful. Besides, Frederick himself did not want to be emperor since he felt he could not afford all the expenses related to the election as well as the administration. So Frederick himself supported Charles, the King of Spain, for the post of the emperor, and Charles was elected. Charles assumed the emperorship under the name Charles V. Charles had now under him a domain over a large territory. It's said that after Charlemagne, the Charles V had the largest geographical area under his emperorship. To this powerful monarch, Pope Leo appealed for help. Charles V was a devout Catholic. Leo prevailed upon him to bring Luther to the Diet of Worms. A Diet is a council of all German rulers. Such a council was being held at this time in the place called Worms. Frederick supported Charles to be the emperor, so he had some influence upon the emperor. The emperor wanted to say thank you to Frederick also. So he has to obey emperor, yes, but the emperor had to obey Pope. It's a vicious circle, but Charles V agreed to the request of Frederick for safe, conduct. So Luther asked for Frederick asked for certain time, and it was granted. So after the trial, whatever be the decision, even if it is burn Luther, nobody can touch Luther until Frederick will take him back to his place of residence. Frederick was given the responsibility of this undertaking. Yes, he was personally given. You secure his safe custody, whatever you want to do. So the dieted worms, protected by the safe